Close your eyes for a moment and imagine, if you will, standing before the mighty pyramids, those towering, ancient giants that touch the heavens. They are not just stone and mortar but symbols of something far more powerful, something that has ruled the heart of Egypt for thousands of years. And there, at the center of it all, sits the pharaoh, clad in gold, with a crown that glints like the sun on the river's surface. This crown, heavy with jewels, is not just an ornament. No, it is the weight of the world, the weight of an entire kingdom resting on one pair of shoulders. Imagine this pharaoh's life. Each day begins before the sun has even risen, with rituals so ancient they are etched in the very bones of Egypt. The scent of incense fills the air, thick and smoky, as the priest whispers prayers in languages older than time itself. The pharaoh, ruler of all, watches as his priests, his guards, his advisors bustle around him in a frenzy, all while he remains still. Anointed in sacred oils, a god on earth, but a man like any other, burdened by the very power that defines him. You, dear listener, are in his shoes. You wear the crown, heavy and cold. Can you feel the weight of it pressing down on your brow? Can you feel the eyes of the people upon you, worshipping you, fearing you, needing you to be everything for them? They look to you for guidance, for protection, for the continuation of their lives. A simple word from you, a glance, and it can shift the course of thousands of lives. But you also know that your every decision could lead to ruin. What if you fail them? The air around you, so thick with expectations, feels almost suffocating. Every ritual, every gesture, carries significance. You must uphold the sacred traditions of Egypt, lest the gods turn their favor away. You are their bridge, their voice. And yet, you are human, with all the fears and doubts that come with it. Now, close your eyes a little tighter. What does it feel like to carry the weight of not only a nation's future but its entire belief system, its culture, its existence? Each step you take is watched. Each word you speak is analyzed. It is a life of constant scrutiny. For even though the throne glitters with gold, it is also a cage, one you can never escape from, not even in your deepest thoughts. So, let me ask you, what would you do if the weight of a nation rested on your shoulders? Would you feel the pressure build, suffocating you, or would you rise to meet the challenge, pushing forward with strength and grace, even when you feel small? Power, in its grandest form, is a paradox, a gift, but also a heavy, burdensome responsibility. And so, we must ask ourselves, is the power truly worth the personal sacrifice? As you reflect on this, let the question linger. And know that even the grandest of rulers, those who seem untouchable, carry burdens beyond imagination. The pharaoh's crown, though dazzling, is not as beautiful as it may first appear. The pharaoh's day begins before the sun touches the horizon. As dawn's first light breaks over the horizon, the weight of the entire kingdom falls on him, not as a simple duty, but as a suffocating mantle. The moment his eyes open, he is not just a man, he is Egypt's heartbeat, its protector, its ruler, its divine representative on earth. The very land, the people, and the gods themselves depend on him. His decisions, whether grand or small, can tilt the balance of life for thousands, perhaps even millions. And with that constant weight comes an ever-present pressure that never fades. Every moment, every decision, he must carry the burden of a nation's future on his shoulders. As the pharaoh rises from his bed, the walls of his palace seem to close in, a constant reminder of his role. His presence commands awe, but behind the golden throne, he is a man like any other, grappling with the responsibility of his power. There is no room for mistakes. One wrong word could lead to famine, rebellion, or worse, anger from the gods themselves. The gods, the ones who have granted him his divine right to rule, are ever watchful, ever demanding. It is his duty to ensure that Egypt remains in harmony with them. Every temple built, every prayer offered, every offering made, it is all part of the delicate dance between the mortal and the divine. If the gods are not pleased, disaster follows. If the people are not satisfied, their loyalty is easily swayed. Every decision is a gamble. Should the pharaoh raise taxes to fund the construction of another temple to honor the gods? Or should he ensure that the harvests are plentiful and the common people are content? How should he respond to reports of a rebellion in the distant corners of Egypt? Squash it with an iron fist or negotiate with kindness and diplomacy? These are not simple choices. Each has the power to alter the course of Egypt's future. But it is not only the gods and the people he must consider. The pharaoh's court is filled with advisors, generals, and officials, each with their own interests and ambitions. One misstep, one slip of the tongue, and political alliances could crumble. Favors could turn to enemies, and the pharaoh would be left alone in his gilded palace, surrounded by rivals ready to take his place. The pharaoh must constantly navigate this web of political intrigue, using wisdom and caution to stay ahead. And then, there is the ever-present fear of warfare. Egypt, for all its greatness, is not invincible. It is surrounded by hostile nations, each vying for power, wealth, and land. The pharaoh must be a strategist, a tactician, and a warrior, even if he never steps onto the battlefield himself. His role as leader means that Egypt's military might, its protection, its survival, rests on his decisions. He must decide whether to wage war, to seek alliances, or to defend the borders from encroaching enemies. The pressure of knowing that one battle could shift the balance of power forever can be unbearable. The pharaoh's life is a relentless cycle of decision-making, each choice more important than the last. He cannot afford to make a single mistake. If the Nile floods too early or too late, it is his fault. If the harvests fail, it is his failure. If a rebellion spreads, it is his responsibility. Even his personal life is not his own. Every relationship, every marriage, every child he fathers is bound to the crown. His heirs must be chosen with care, as the future of Egypt rests in their hands. And as much as he longs for peace, for quiet moments to himself, they are fleeting. He is always needed, always called upon. Imagine the anxiety of making decisions for an entire kingdom. Have you ever felt that pressure in your own life, even in small ways? Perhaps you've had to make a choice for your family, your job, or your friends, knowing that your decision would affect them. Did you feel the weight of it, even just for a moment? Now, stretch that feeling to its extreme. Think of it not just as a decision that impacts one person, but an entire people, a whole kingdom. Every moment of every day, the pharaoh is aware of the far-reaching consequences of his actions. There is no room for error. His life is not his own. The weight of leadership is constant, unrelenting, and unforgiving. It's easy to romanticize power, to think of a ruler sitting on a golden throne, adored by all. But the reality of that power is far different. It's a life of constant pressure, where every choice, no matter how small, could lead to ruin. The pharaoh, for all his wealth and influence, carries a burden that no one else can understand. He lives in a world where his every breath matters, where every decision could change the fate of Egypt itself. And as much as he may wish for a moment of peace, that moment never comes. The grandeur of the pharaoh's palace is undeniable. Its towering columns, adorned with intricate carvings, reflect the power and divinity of the ruler within. Luxurious silks drape over the walls, the scent of incense clings to the air, and the sound of golden jewelry clinks as the pharaoh moves through the halls. From the outside, it seems like the perfect existence, a life of endless opulence and admiration. Yet, behind these walls, the pharaoh is anything but free. Despite being the most powerful person in the kingdom, the pharaoh is paradoxically one of the most isolated. He is not a man, but a god, a divine being who stands above all others. The people revere him, bow before him, and offer their prayers, but no one truly sees him as a person. No one can. The pharaoh, with his golden crown and royal robes, is a figure of worship, a symbol of Egypt's strength and eternal grandeur. But in his isolation, he is slowly removed from the very humanity that makes him a person. The walls of his palace, which were meant to protect him, have instead become a gilded cage. As a child, perhaps, the pharaoh dreamt of living among the people, of experiencing the simple joys of everyday life. But those dreams fade when the crown is placed upon his head. From that moment on, he becomes a symbol, an embodiment of Egypt's power, its gods, and its eternal legacy. The people no longer see him as a man with hopes, fears, or dreams. They see him only as a ruler, a divine figure to be worshipped from a distance. And the more they worship him, the farther they push him from their hearts. In his chambers, the pharaoh is never truly alone, yet he often feels profoundly lonely. Servants and officials move around him like shadows, always attending to his needs, always offering their praises, but never offering true companionship. His advisors speak to him with a formality that reflects the distance between them, treating him with deference but never with the kindness of a friend. Even his family, those closest to him, view him through the lens of his power, his divinity. The love he receives is tainted by duty, reverence, and fear. His children, his wives, may bow before him, but how many of them see him as a father or a husband? How many see the man behind the crown? Imagine, for a moment, the isolation that comes with being constantly admired but never truly known. To be surrounded by people all day, to be the center of attention, and yet to feel no real connection with anyone. The pharaoh can never step outside of his divine role. Every word he speaks, every action he takes, is scrutinized by those who surround him. He cannot relax. He cannot speak candidly. Everything he does is viewed through the lens of his status. There is no room for vulnerability, no space for authentic relationships. And in that absence, the pharaoh becomes a stranger to himself. He is trapped in a role that is both his blessing and his curse. Have you ever felt alone despite being surrounded by others? It's a strange, almost painful kind of solitude, isn't it? To be surrounded by faces, voices, and gestures, yet to feel disconnected from everyone around you. Perhaps, for a moment, you found yourself in a crowd, and despite being with friends or family, you felt utterly isolated. The pharaoh experiences this every moment of his life. He cannot even escape to find solace in his own thoughts. Every room he enters, every decision he makes, carries the weight of the kingdom. His soul, once free, has been imprisoned by the very people who worship him. What is it like to have everyone see you as something other than who you really are? The pharaoh's identity has become inseparable from his position. He is not seen as a person, but as the living embodiment of Egypt itself. The public worship him, the priests call him a god, but who sees the man beneath the royal robes? Who sees his weariness, his longing for a quiet moment, his desire for true connection? The answer, sadly, is no one. And so, the pharaoh lives in a world where no one knows him, no one understands him, and he is perpetually alone, surrounded by the echoing walls of his palace. Even as the pharaoh stands in the grand halls of his palace, even as he listens to the sounds of music and the laughter of his courtiers, he feels the emptiness. The laughter is not for him, but for the spectacle of his life. The music is not a melody for his soul, but a soundtrack for his status. He is a god to be revered, but never a man to be loved. And so, the pharaoh's life, filled with luxury, is also filled with a quiet despair. He is never seen for who he truly is. His humanity is obscured by the weight of his crown. The very people who call him divine and worship him from afar are the ones who keep him from being truly seen, truly known. He is trapped in a life where the more he is adored, the more he is isolated. The more his power grows, the more his loneliness deepens. Reflecting on this, one might consider their own moments of solitude. In our own lives, we often find ourselves surrounded by others, but how often do we truly connect with those around us? The pharaoh, though a ruler with the world at his feet, suffers from a lack of meaningful connection. The paradox of power is that it can distance you from the very people you serve. The more people see you as a symbol, the less they see you as human. The pharaoh's life, while outwardly resplendent with wealth and power, was deeply intertwined with the unseen forces of the divine. From the moment the crown was placed upon his head, he was no longer just a ruler. He was the bridge between the gods and the people of Egypt. His role was to maintain the balance between heaven and earth, to channel the will of the gods and ensure their favor. His every action, every word, was infused with divine significance, for the gods demanded nothing less than perfection. Imagine, for a moment, waking up each day not just as a ruler, but as a divine representative. Before the sun even rises, the pharaoh's day begins with rituals that tie him directly to the gods. The air is thick with the scent of incense as the priests begin their chants, their voices echoing through the grand halls of the palace. The pharaoh, dressed in the sacred garments of his office, stands before the temple, his hands raised in prayer. But this is not just a personal devotion. It is an act that ensures the stability of the entire kingdom. The very forces that govern the Nile, that bring the harvest, that keep the people healthy and safe, all rest upon the pharaoh's ability to maintain favor with the gods. Every decision, no matter how small, is filtered through the lens of divine expectation. Should the pharaoh give his approval for a new temple to be built in honor of a particular god? If he does not, will that anger the god and bring misfortune upon the land? What if a festival to celebrate the gods falls short of the expected grandeur? What if the people do not offer enough sacrifices or fail to follow the proper rituals? These are not mere questions of preference. They are life and death matters. If the gods are displeased, the consequences could be disastrous. Famine, disease, war. These were the punishments for a pharaoh who failed in his divine duties. The pharaoh's life is one of constant vigilance. There is no respite from the weight of religious expectation. Every step he takes, every gesture he makes, is scrutinized not only by his advisors and the people but also by the gods themselves. His ability to make the correct offerings, to perform the proper rituals, to keep the land in harmony with the heavens, this is what defines his reign. He is not merely a ruler, he is a god in human form, a living embodiment of divine will. His actions must reflect the purity of the god's intentions, and the people must see him as a flawless representative of their divine powers. But this divine role comes with an immense burden. The pharaoh cannot afford to show weakness, to express doubt, or to make a mistake. He is expected to embody the god's will at all times, to be the perfect intermediary between the mortal realm and the divine. There is no room for error, no allowance for human imperfection. In the eyes of the people, the pharaoh is the embodiment of Egypt's prosperity. If he falters in his divine duties, the nation itself could collapse. Even in his personal moments, the pharaoh is never truly free from the god's expectations. As he sits in his royal chambers, surrounded by luxury, he knows that his every thought, his every action, must align with the will of the divine. He cannot indulge in the simple pleasures of life as others might. The people look to him as their guide, their spiritual leader, and he must lead by example. He is the one who must ensure that the sacred laws are followed, that the gods are kept pleased, and that the land flourishes. If the pharaoh fails in this, the people will suffer, and he will be held accountable. As a ruler, the pharaoh's authority is absolute, but this power is tempered by his position as a divine servant. His life is not his own. It belongs to the gods and to the people. The pressure to remain in the gods' favor is a constant, unrelenting force. The pharaoh is not just a ruler of men, but a ruler of cosmic forces, balancing the needs of both the heavens and the earth. This responsibility, heavy as it is, defines every aspect of his existence. Have you ever felt like your actions are guided by something larger than yourself? Perhaps it's a moral compass, a sense of duty, or a higher power. In those moments, you may feel the weight of responsibility, of knowing that your decisions affect not only your own life but the lives of others around you. Now, imagine carrying the weight of an entire nation's spiritual needs. The pharaoh's every decision, his every act, must reflect the god's will. It's a responsibility that no mortal could truly understand unless they've experienced it themselves. The pharaoh, standing at the crossroads of divinity and humanity, is constantly reminded that the balance of Egypt's prosperity, peace, and future rests on his ability to maintain the god's favor. Can you imagine the anxiety of being in a position where every action you take is tied not just to the present moment, but to the fate of the future? The pharaoh's life is one of unrelenting pressure, where his every breath is shaped by divine expectations. And when the people look to him for guidance, they do not see a man, they see a god, a perfect being capable of ensuring Egypt's survival. For the pharaoh, this is both a blessing and a curse. The gods demand everything from him, and there is no room for failure. Every action, every decision, must be flawless, for the stakes are nothing less than the future of Egypt itself. The grandeur of the pharaoh's life is often depicted as a regal, unshakable symbol of power. But beneath that glittering surface lies a far more complex and human reality. For all the wealth, influence, and divine connection, ruling Egypt also meant managing the delicate and often tumultuous dynamics of family, something that could be as demanding and as fraught with tension as the duties of the throne itself. At the heart of a pharaoh's reign is the need to secure a stable dynasty, one that will carry on the legacy of power and leadership. But as we all know, family relationships are never as simple as the public might believe. For a pharaoh, raising heirs to inherit the throne is not merely a matter of love and care. It is a matter of politics, survival, and strategy. Each royal child, each prince and princess, carries the weight of an entire nation's future. And the pharaoh, as both a parent and a ruler, must constantly balance the responsibilities of raising these heirs with the ever-present pressure of maintaining power. Imagine the pharaoh's life. Each day is filled with not just matters of state, but personal struggles within the royal family. There are heirs to be groomed, alliances to be made, and, perhaps most painfully, rivalries to be managed. The pharaoh's children are not merely children. They are potential threats, competitors for the throne. Every time a new heir is born, the pharaoh's mind must grapple with the possibility that one of them could someday seek to overthrow him. The relationship between a pharaoh and his children, though steeped in affection, is clouded by the knowledge that one day, the crown will pass to one of them, and that process is anything but smooth. Inheritance struggles were common in royal families, particularly in Egypt, where succession was often contested. The pharaoh's children, whether born of a beloved queen or a political marriage, were often rivals in waiting. Those who stood closest to the throne, sons and daughters, were taught from an early age that power was not given freely. It had to be fought for. As a result, children who grew up in the pharaoh's palace might find themselves bitter rivals, each vying for their place in the royal lineage. The pharaoh, aware of the danger posed by such rivalries, had to navigate these tensions carefully, always keeping an eye on his heirs and their ambitions. But the family struggles did not stop with the children. The pharaoh's relationship with his spouse, too, was often complicated. Marriages in royal families were rarely about love. They were about alliances, politics, and securing the future of the dynasty. The pharaoh might have had multiple wives, each of them holding their own power and influence in the royal court. The dynamics between these women could be fraught with tension, as each one sought to position her child as the next ruler of Egypt. These marital conflicts could spill over into the pharaoh's reign, with rival factions within the family competing for influence and control. The pharaoh's children were often caught in the middle of these dynastic struggles, torn between loyalty to their father and the desire to gain power for themselves. The pressure placed on them to secure the throne could cause emotional turmoil, creating divisions within the family that could threaten the very stability of the kingdom. What happens when the pharaoh's own blood, the children he raised, begin to turn against him in pursuit of their own ambitions? How does a ruler maintain his power when the ones closest to him, those who should be his greatest allies, become his most dangerous enemies? The personal cost of ruling, particularly within the context of family, cannot be overstated. The pharaoh's relationship with his heirs is steeped in complexity. For all the love a parent might feel for their child, there is an ever-present reminder that the throne is finite, that only one heir can succeed. The pharaoh may have known deep down that the pressure to be perfect, to lead Egypt without flaw, weighed heavily on his children, just as it weighed on him. But in the end, it was a cold truth. Only one could rule. Do you think family expectations ever become too much to bear? When the weight of an entire nation's future is bound to your name, the emotional cost can be overwhelming. The pharaoh's personal life, with its rivalries and struggles, humanizes him, reminding us that even those who hold the highest power are not immune to the pain of family conflict. What happens when your loved ones expect too much of you? What happens when those who should be your closest allies become your greatest rivals? The pharaoh's struggles within his own family, his relationships with his children, his wives, and even his own heart, highlight the deep emotional toll of ruling. The crown may glitter with gold, but the struggles it represents are felt within the walls of the royal palace, where love and power collide. The pharaoh's life, for all its grandeur and divine mandate, was never free from the shadows of war. The threats to Egypt's borders were constant, whether from ambitious neighboring kingdoms seeking to expand their power, or from rebellious factions within the empire itself. The pharaoh, though seen as an invincible ruler, was deeply vulnerable in times of war. The perception of divine protection, of being untouchable, often masked the very real toll that defending Egypt's empire took on his mind, body, and soul. Every pharaoh faced the challenge of ensuring the security of Egypt, but not all of them were skilled in battle. Many were forced to lead their armies into war not out of desire, but out of necessity. The weight of this responsibility weighed heavily on their shoulders. In the quiet moments before a campaign began, the pharaoh would have known, deep down, that the lives of thousands, if not more, were now in his hands. His decisions in the heat of battle would determine the fate of Egypt and its people. Imagine standing at the edge of a battlefield, watching as the soldiers prepare for combat. The smell of dust and sweat fills the air, the sounds of armor clinking, and the murmurs of tense voices echoing around you. As pharaoh, your role is not just symbolic. You are the one who must make the critical decisions that could alter the course of a war. If you choose poorly, the consequences are devastating. You are expected to lead, to inspire, to act with courage and strength. But beneath the armor of power, the pharaoh is human, too. And like any leader, he faces the same fears, the same exhaustion, that any soldier feels when thrust into the chaos of battle. The mental toll of warfare cannot be underestimated. As the pharaoh, you must constantly make strategic decisions, weighing the lives of your soldiers against the potential gain of victory. But what happens when your strategy fails? What happens when, despite all your planning, the enemy proves stronger, smarter, or more relentless? The pharaoh, though divine in the eyes of his people, is not invincible. He is as vulnerable as any other man in the heat of battle. The loss of a single soldier is painful, but the loss of a battle is something that can shake the very foundation of his rule. War, after all, is not just about the physical toll it takes on an empire. It is about the emotional and psychological cost. A pharaoh may return from a victorious campaign, only to be haunted by the faces of the fallen soldiers, the cries of the wounded. The glory of battle fades quickly, replaced by the crushing weight of grief, of knowing that your kingdom's blood has been spilled in the name of defense. Even in victory, the pharaoh feels the exhaustion, the loss, the emotional scars of war that never truly fade. The constant threat of rebellion from within Egypt adds another layer of stress to the pharaoh's reign. The Egyptian empire, vast and ancient, was often plagued by unrest from its own people. A faction rising up, challenging the pharaoh's authority, was not an uncommon occurrence. In these instances, the pharaoh was forced to fight not just foreign invaders, but internal enemies as well. The pressure to maintain control over his kingdom was immense, and it was not just a matter of military might. The pharaoh had to navigate the delicate balance of maintaining loyalty among his generals, advisors, and subjects while also ensuring that the gods remained pleased with his rule. If the people were dissatisfied, or if rebellion took root, the pharaoh's reign could be brought to a swift and brutal end. Imagine the weight of defending not just a kingdom, but your own people's faith in you. The pharaoh must constantly balance the task of waging war with the responsibility of maintaining his image as a strong, invincible leader. There is no time for doubt, no space for weakness. In times of battle, the pharaoh must always be composed, always in control, even when every ounce of his being longs for peace, for rest, for escape from the never-ending cycle of warfare. Have you ever felt the exhaustion of a long, drawn-out battle, even in your own life? Perhaps you faced a situation where conflict seemed to stretch on endlessly, where every effort you made to resolve it felt like an uphill climb. How do you cope with that strain? For the pharaoh, this battle never truly ends. There is always another threat looming, another challenge to face. Victory brings a brief respite, but soon the pharaoh is thrust back into the chaos of war. The toll on his body is undeniable. Physical injuries from battle, sleepless nights spent planning strategy, and the relentless pressure of leading an empire. But the emotional toll is often more profound. The pharaoh's mind is consumed with fear, fear of failure, fear of losing his people, fear of letting down the very gods who chose him to rule. And yet, through all of this, the pharaoh must maintain the facade of invincibility. His people look to him for guidance, for strength. They expect him to be unshaken, unbreakable, even in the face of disaster. But inside, the pharaoh is not so different from the soldiers he commands. He, too, feels the weight of every decision, the toll of every battle. And though he may wear a crown and command armies, he is ultimately just a man, vulnerable to the same fears and exhaustion as anyone else. Their name through the ages, war, with all its glory and brutality, strips away the facade of power. The pharaoh, though mighty, is only human. And as he stands on the battlefield, surrounded by the sounds of conflict, he must confront the very real cost of defending his kingdom, mentally, physically, and emotionally. The toll of constant warfare is not just measured in the lives lost, but in the scars it leaves on the soul of the pharaoh, the one who must bear the weight of an empire's survival. The crown of Egypt, glittering with the power of the gods, was never without its shadow, the shadow of death. For the pharaoh, the fear of death was a constant companion, lurking in the background of every decision, every battle, and every ritual. Though seen as divine, immortal in the eyes of the people, the pharaoh was all too aware of his own mortality. The very same body that held the divine will of the gods was fragile, vulnerable, and susceptible to illness, injury, and the ever-present threat of assassination. From the moment the pharaoh ascended the throne, death was never far from his thoughts. He may have worn the crown with pride, standing tall as the representative of the gods on earth, but behind the walls of his palace, the reality was clear: no pharaoh ruled forever. Many pharaohs died young, their reigns cut short by the very enemies they swore to protect the kingdom from. It was not just the foreign invaders who posed a threat, but the treacherous whispers within their own courts. Assassination was a very real possibility. A change in the political landscape, a shift in alliances, or even a moment of weakness could lead to the pharaoh's untimely death. But it was not just the political threats that haunted the pharaoh. The fragility of the human body, regardless of how divine the pharaoh might be perceived, was a reminder that all men must eventually meet their end. The pharaoh might have believed in his eternal connection to the gods, in his divine right to rule forever, but his body would eventually fail him. Illness, age, and war would take their toll, and no amount of divine favor could change that. For all the power a pharaoh possessed, there was a deep awareness that his reign could be short-lived. Some pharaohs ruled for decades, their names etched into the stones of temples and tombs for all eternity. Others, however, saw their time cut short. A sudden illness, an arrow from a rival, or the deadly whispers of a betrayal could end a reign before it truly began. For those pharaohs, death was not just an inevitability. It was a cruel, unceremonious interruption to their plans, their dreams of immortality. This fear of death, this awareness of the fleeting nature of life, shaped much of the pharaoh's actions and decisions. His legacy, his name, would outlast him, or so he hoped. The Egyptians, for all their belief in the gods, were profoundly aware of their own mortality. Their obsession with the afterlife, with immortality, was not just a religious belief. It was a reflection of their deep desire to transcend the limits of their human bodies. The pharaoh's tomb, that grand structure built to house his body for eternity, was more than just a burial site. It was a symbol of his journey to immortality. The grand pyramids, with their towering spires reaching toward the heavens, were built not just to honor the pharaoh in death but to ensure his soul would live on forever. The pharaoh, despite his fear of death, believed in the eternal journey of the soul. His tomb would be filled with treasures, food, and sacred texts, all meant to provide for him in the afterlife. He was not just a ruler in life. He was meant to be a god in death as well. But this belief, comforting as it might have been, did not erase the very real fear that death could come at any moment, snatching the pharaoh away before he had the chance to complete his earthly duties. The rituals of burial, the preparation of the body, and the intricate ceremonies were all part of the pharaoh's final journey to the afterlife. He would be embalmed, his organs carefully removed and preserved, his body carefully wrapped in linen. These rituals were meant to preserve the pharaoh's physical form for eternity, ensuring that his soul would have a vessel to return to in the next life. The grandness of these rituals, the offerings of gold, food, and treasures, were all intended to help the pharaoh journey into the afterlife in comfort and security. But despite all the preparation, despite all the faith in immortality, death was never truly defeated. It's in this paradox, the belief in eternal life alongside the undeniable fear of death, that the human experience of the pharaoh lies. Despite the grand tombs and the promises of the gods, the pharaoh could not escape the frailty of his human body. He may have believed in an afterlife, in the promise of eternal existence among the gods, but that did not stop the fear of dying young, of being cut down before his time. As the pharaoh lay on his deathbed, surrounded by loyal servants, physicians, and priests, his thoughts must have turned to the journey that lay ahead. Would he find his way to the afterlife? Would his soul be accepted by the gods? Was he truly ready to leave his kingdom, his people, behind? The pharaoh's fear of death was not just the fear of personal demise, but the fear of leaving his people in uncertain hands. The weight of leadership, the fear of leaving Egypt vulnerable, was a burden few could understand. In those final moments, he was not a god. He was simply a man, afraid of what might come next. Pause for a moment and reflect on your own mortality. How do you think about death? It is something we all must face, yet it often feels like something distant, something we do not wish to acknowledge. But death, as inevitable as it is a part of the larger journey. For the pharaoh, it was not just an end. It was a transition to something beyond, a continuation of life in another form. Yet, even with all the rituals, the prayers, and the belief in immortality, the fear of death never fully leaves. How do we cope with conflict in our lives? How do we approach the unknown, the inevitable? Perhaps the pharaoh's legacy lies not only in his accomplishments but in his ability to face the unknown with courage, even as he feared the end. Despite the struggles, the pain, and the often short-lived reigns, the pharaohs left behind a legacy that would echo through the ages. Their names carved into the stone of temples, pyramids that still stand as silent witnesses to their ambition, and the cultures they shaped. These monuments have endured for millennia, outlasting even the pharaohs themselves. In their quest for immortality, they built not just for themselves but for future generations, hoping that their reigns, their accomplishments, and their divine connection would live on in the hearts and minds of the people. The tension between the pharaoh's desire for immortality and the often fleeting nature of their reigns is striking. Pharaohs worked tirelessly to ensure that their legacies would stand the test of time. They commissioned massive building projects, temples, pyramids, and tombs that would outlast them all, reaching toward the heavens, defying time itself. The grandeur of these structures was not just a display of power. They were meant to ensure the pharaoh's memory would never fade. Their personal lives, filled with struggles, conflicts, and vulnerabilities, may have been fleeting, but the structures they left behind were meant to immortalize them, to carry. Despite the challenges of their reigns, pharaohs became symbols of Egypt's greatness. Their dynasties, for all the internal turmoil, are remembered for the splendor they brought to the land. The pharaohs were the embodiment of Egypt's power and endurance, even though they themselves were often frail, isolated, and faced with immense personal costs. Their legacies, in the form of monumental temples, artwork, and written records, tell the story of a civilization that survived through their leadership. But the pharaoh's legacy was not just about grand structures. It was also about the cultural imprint they left. From the advancements in architecture, art, and science to the religious practices they helped shape, the pharaohs influenced every aspect of life in ancient Egypt. Their reigns, for all their challenges, were marked by remarkable achievements that would be passed down through generations. However, their personal lives were often marked by turmoil, assassinations, betrayals, and the constant strain of leadership. It is a striking contrast. While their public lives may have been one of glory and divinity, their personal lives were often filled with loneliness, isolation, and the struggle to maintain power. And yet, despite all of this, they became symbols of Egypt's enduring greatness. Their legacies, for all their imperfections, were immortalized in the very stones of their tombs, the structures they built, and the stories told about them by future generations. As we reflect on the pharaoh's legacy, perhaps we can ask ourselves the same question. What do we want to be remembered for? What mark do we wish to leave on the world? The pharaohs sought immortality through their monuments and deeds, and while their reigns may have been brief and fraught with hardship, their legacies endure. How do we, in our own lives, navigate the balance between personal struggles and the desire to leave a lasting impact? Just as the pharaohs looked toward the future, we too can think about how our actions will be remembered long after we are gone. The life of a pharaoh is a tale of paradoxes, immense power wrapped in a veil of vulnerability, reverence and adoration on one side, isolation and loneliness on the other. The pharaoh stood at the pinnacle of human achievement, blessed with divine favor, wealth beyond imagination, and an empire that stretched across the fertile banks of the Nile. And yet, for all this grandeur, his life was not free of struggles. The very power that set him apart from all others was also the source of his deepest burdens. On the surface, the pharaoh was revered as a living god, a being above the ordinary mortal. He was seen as the one who held the cosmos together, the intermediary between the divine and the earthly. His word was law, his decisions sacred, and his presence a beacon of hope for his people. But this constant adoration came with an immense price. The pharaoh was never truly free to be himself. His every action, every word, was scrutinized by his subjects, his family, and even the gods themselves. In the eyes of his people, he could do no wrong, but in his own heart, the weight of expectation often felt unbearable. And then there was the isolation. The pharaoh was surrounded by luxury, surrounded by advisors and courtiers, but never truly seen as a person. He was a symbol, a vessel of divine will, but in many ways, he was alone. The people revered him, but they did not know him. His family, too, saw him through the lens of power, never truly able to connect with him as a father, a husband, or a man. In the quiet moments, behind the walls of his palace, the pharaoh may have longed for simple companionship, for someone to see him as more than the divine ruler he was portrayed to be. Yet, such desires could never be realized in a world where his every action was a matter of state. The pharaoh's reign was marked by a constant tension between strength and fragility. On the one hand, he commanded armies, governed an empire, and made decisions that affected the lives of millions. On the other hand, he was vulnerable to illness, assassination, and the ravages of time. Despite his divine status, the pharaoh was not immune to the very human fears that affect us all. The fear of death, the fear of failure, the fear of leaving a broken kingdom behind. His body, though adorned with the finest clothes and jewelry, was still subject to decay, his mind still susceptible to doubt. His immense power, in the end, was a fragile thing. And so, the pharaoh's life was a balancing act, an intricate dance between glory and struggle, between duty and desire, between the weight of the crown and the fragility of his own being. The very thing that made him powerful, the responsibility to his people, to the gods, and to his legacy, was also the thing that made his life unbearably hard. To rule Egypt was to be constantly at odds with the limitations of his humanity. To be revered and adored while carrying the burden of an entire kingdom. To be seen as invincible while feeling the pressures of mortality. It was a paradox that no amount of wealth, no amount of divine favor, could resolve. As we reflect on the pharaoh's life, it's clear that power, while alluring, is not without its costs. The pharaoh's story is a reminder of the complexity of leadership, of the weight that comes with authority. It invites us to think about what we truly value in life, what sacrifices we are willing to make in the pursuit of our goals, and whether the things we think we want will bring us the fulfillment we seek. It asks us to consider the fragility of power, the loneliness that can come with responsibility, and the deep, often unspoken struggles that lie beneath the surface of those who lead. So, as we close this story, take a moment to reflect on the journey. Think about the balance of power and vulnerability in your own life. In what ways do you carry responsibilities, and what sacrifices come with them? What lessons can you take from the pharaoh's story, from his triumphs and his burdens? As we all continue our own paths, let us remember that the things we seek in life, whether it be power, success, or legacy, come with their own costs. And in understanding that cost, we may learn how to live more fully, with greater awareness and acceptance of both our strengths and our weaknesses. The pharaoh's life, as grand and tragic as it was, serves as a quiet reminder that no one is truly invincible. That even the most powerful among us are subject to the same human frailties, the same fears, and the same inevitabilities. And yet, despite it all, the pharaohs of Egypt remain symbols of greatness, their names echoing through the sands of time, a testament to the enduring struggle between power and vulnerability.